Okay, hello everybody. Um, Today we're going to learn a new skill that is called hybrid comparison and reliability. And for this kind of questions, basically it involves two sources. It is called a hybrid because you are combining the two skills, basically comparison and the skill of testing for reliability, or in this case also to proof. So proof and reliability actually are the same so-called concept, right? So we're going to look at a simple example, and hopefully from that simple example, you will then be able to apply the skills learned when we look at real historical sources, all right? So this is a simple example. Study sources C and D. How far does source D prove that source C was wrong, or it could be false or unjustified? Explain your answer. Okay. Most of the time in the O-level question, they will use the term wrong. But sometimes we see in the O-levels, they will use the word false or they use the word unjustified. But actually, it's the same thing, all right? It's about how far does source D prove that this source was wrong, right? And we're going to look at some sources as a simple example. So then hopefully from that, these simple examples, you are able to use the skills learned to apply to even more challenging sources. So we're going to use this simple example. First is source C, said by a Liverpool fan. And this Liverpool fan says, Man U is not a great club. Their stadium is at Old Trafford. We are going to look at source D, and source D is said by a Man U fan. And the source says Man U is a great club. Their stadium is at Old Trafford, all right? And the next source, source E. I'm putting source E here because later on we need some cross-referencing. And so source E becomes the source that we can cross-reference. And source E is said by a sports historian. So a sports historian is somewhat quite reliable. I mean, he's an expert in history and in sports, right? And he says Man U is a great club. Their stadium is at Old Trafford. Okay, so using these three sources, we are going to try to answer this question. All right. Now, you can refer to your worksheet. There's actually a worksheet for this, and you can use that worksheet to fill in so-called the answers as we go through this simple example. Take note, before we start how to answer this question, take note that source D is what we call the main source, because source D is trying to prove that source C was wrong, all right? Later on, why is it important to know the main source is because later on you will need to cross-reference to the main source, okay? Now, the first step you need to do is this. Like your normal comparison question, you need to find similarity and differences. And so we're going to start off by finding the similarity first. What is the similarity between source D and source C in terms of content? And you can see from this simple example, obviously the similarity was that both sources agree that Man U Stadium is at Old Trafford. So that is the basis of comparison. And of course, in a real exam for O levels, you need to explain the evidence and quote the evidence. But in this simple example, we do not really need to do so. But it's a very simple statement. Both agree that the stadium is at Old Trafford. What is now more important is that how do you fill in the blank down there? Okay, is it does not prove or does prove? And of course, the answer is source D does not prove that source C was wrong, because both sources agree that the stadium or Man U Stadium is at Old Trafford. In other words, source C is not wrong, all right, because both of them are agreeing on something. Okay, so I hope that this is clear. Let me pause here for a moment so that you can absorb the word that is being used. So source D does not prove that source C was wrong, as both sources agree. All right. Now, of course, do remember, as mentioned, for longer sources in the O levels, you must provide evidences from the sources and you must explain the evidences. All right. Now, after you have found the similarity, the next step is to find the difference. Okay, so remember, you must find one similarity and then you need to find one difference. Now, I think from this simple source, you know that there's one big difference from the BOC is they disagree on whether Man U is a great club, right? Source D, said by a Man U fan, of course, they will say Man U is a great club, while source C, said by a Liverpool fan, Man U is not a great club, all right? So they disagree. And you know that blank that we need to fill in, of course, that blank is source D does prove that source C was wrong. Why? Because the two of them are disagreeing. So definitely one of them is wrong. And therefore, source D does prove that source C was wrong. Okay, so I'm going to pause here for a moment for you to absorb this. Remember, source D does prove that source C was wrong because they disagree. All right. So as mentioned, for longer sources, you must provide evidences from the sources and you must explain the evidences. Now, then we come to step 2A. I call it step 2A is because we need to rely on the disagreement, which is the difference, which was actually step 2. And in step 2A, basically, you need to cross-reference another reliable source or cross-reference your own knowledge with source D to check if source D is reliable. If you can recall earlier, I said that source D is the main source. And therefore, we need to check, is source D reliable through cross-referencing? Right? Is source D reliable through cross-referencing? So now, if source D is reliable, then the statement continues to hold true that source D does prove that source C was wrong because source D is reliable. All right. And when you do cross-referencing, you can write this. So when I cross-reference to source E agrees with source D. And what was the agreement? The agreement was the sports historian in source E also says that Man U is a great club. And so when you cross-reference, you again provide the evidence, you explain, right? Source E was said by a sports historian. He said that Man U is a great club. So by cross-referencing, we know that now, source D is reliable. And therefore, because it's reliable, source D does continue to prove that source C was wrong. Okay? Now, take note, however, if you were to cross-reference to a reliable source, if source D was to cross-reference to a reliable source or your own knowledge, and it disagrees, then source D becomes unreliable. And if source D becomes unreliable, then the whole statement begins to change, which means you will say, because source D is unreliable and therefore does not prove that source C was wrong. All right? So depending on the reliability of source D, your statement changes. All right? Now, the final step is to evaluate the provenance/purpose of one of the source to check for reliability and to determine which source is wrong. And here's where, as a historian, you need to look at the two sources, source C and source D. One is said by a Liverpool fan, one is said by a Man U fan. And then you must wonder to yourself, which has a questionable purpose? And let's now decide, and we say that source C does have a questionable purpose, all right? And we start to write the purpose and the provenance to check for reliability of source C. And this is an example, all right? Source C has a questionable purpose and is unreliable. And we can say, as is said by a Liverpool fan who's a rival of Man U, so you establish the provenance. His purpose was definitely to convince, which is the purpose verb, people or readers or whoever wants to read this message, the audience, that Man U is not a great club. That's the message. Then you also must provide the evidence so that people will start to mock Manchester United. That's the intended impact, right? I mean, when Liverpool people say, oh, Man U is not a great club, what's the impact? You want to make people feel that, Man U is a poor club and so on, so that maybe people will start to hate Manchester United. Now, therefore, because it has a questionable purpose, source C therefore becomes unreliable. Now, if source C becomes unreliable, then the statement goes, source D does prove that source C was wrong. Because if source C is unreliable, source C is wrong. And therefore, source D does prove that. All right, so I pause here for a moment. You absorb this, all right? Now, take note, if you evaluate the provenance and purpose of source D, which you can, which is the Manchester United so-called provenance, and you make an argument that source D is unreliable, then source D does not prove that source C was wrong. All right, so depending on which source is unreliable, be it source D or source C, the statement then begins to change. Okay? So you must be flexible in your thinking, all right? This is quite hard to do. It will take a few times for you to practice this, but hopefully once you get it, you will know how to make your statements and answer the question. So how does a full answer look like? So as mentioned, let's recall, we first talk about, does not prove that source C was wrong by looking at similarity. And the similarity is that both sources agree that Man U Stadium is at Old Trafford. Then we do a difference, right? And when we do a difference, then the statement goes, source D does prove that source C was wrong, as they disagree of whether or not Man U is a great club, right? Because source D says Man U is a great club, source C says Man U is not a great club. After that, you need to do your cross-referencing of the main source, in this case, source D. So when you do the cross-referencing to source E, because source E agrees with source D becomes reliable, because source E was said by a sports historian, and because source D is reliable through cross-referencing, source D does prove that source C was wrong. And the final step is you look at the purpose and the provenance. And let's say we choose source C, and we say source C has a questionable purpose, said by a Liverpool fan, rival of Man U. We give the purpose to convince the people that Man U is not a great club, so that people will start to mock Man U. Therefore, source C unreliable. Source D does prove that source C was wrong. All right. So if you look at the answer is somewhat balanced. There's one answer that says does not, 3 answers that says does. What happens is that when you do this, 1 answer that says does not and 3 answer that says does, you have considered 2 views. And because when you consider 2 views, you will get your full marks. Now, sometimes the students may want to skip the first part here and just talk about does, and does. When the student does that, right, the student will not get the full marks. But you will still get pretty high, maybe about 5 out of 6. And so you lose that 1 mark because you do not provide the other alternative of does not. All right. So you need to really decide, given the amount of time in the exam, how much you want to write. And you can see that, when you write certain things, especially when you talk about purpose and cross-referencing, you tend to move up to the higher range. All right. So you really need to think through what you want to use, be it cross-referencing, provenance, purpose, content, and then see what kind of your answer will look like. But a full answer to get the full 6 marks will look something like this. Okay. Now, of course, let's end off with this amazing statement, all right? Okay, in summary, step 1, find the similarity between the two sources. Step 2, find the difference between the two sources to prove or not prove. Step 2A, cross-reference to check for another reliable source or own knowledge with the main source to check if the main source is reliable. And if the main source is reliable, then you can make the argument it does prove. And step 3, you need to evaluate the provenance or purpose of one source. You decide, is it source C or source D? Check for the reliability, and depending on which source is not reliable, then that source will be wrong. Now, in the O-levels, there are many ways that this question can be written. And so we must be flexible and be prepared to answer them when they come out. So these are 3 possible ways, that O-level might ask this kind of question. And let's try to do this, and at least you get your thinking going as you try to answer the question. So the first one, does what source E say mean that the author is lying in source D? Actually, what this question is really saying is that, author is lying means author is wrong. So actually, it's roughly the same format, just that now the word lying has been used instead of wrong. So, but in the exam, we need to use the word lying. So what we can say is this: source E's content, they're quite similar. Then source E does not prove that the author is lying. Can you see that I always try to answer the question because the question is about the author lying. Then if they disagree, they're different, then it does prove that the author is lying. Or in this case, if you want to recall, that it does prove that the author is wrong. Okay, so lying and wrong is like the same thing. Now, if source E's content cross-reference to another reliable source and own knowledge and agrees, then source E is reliable, then source E does prove that the author is lying. And if source E's content cross-reference to another reliable source of own knowledge and disagrees, then source E is unreliable, then source E does not prove that the author is lying. Okay, because source E is unreliable, therefore it cannot prove that the author is lying. Now, what happens if source D has a questionable purpose? Then the author of source D is unreliable, and therefore the statement would be source E does prove that the author is lying in source D. All right? Okay, in other words, source D is wrong, lying. And if source E has a reliable provenance and purpose, then source E does prove that the author is lying. Okay? Because source E is reliable, and therefore we can know that it proves that the author is lying when there's that kind of disagreement, all right? Which source is more reliable? Now, let's try this question now. Now, this question is a bit different because, for the last 2 questions type, we are always looking at wrong, false, lying, unjustified. But sometimes in the O-levels, they will say, does source E prove that what the author say in source F is correct? So now they flip it over and say, no longer wrong, but now it's correct. Explain your answer. All right, so the answer is a bit different, but actually the principles still remain the same. So when we think about it, now it's correct. If the 2 sources' content are different, then source E does not prove that what the author says is correct. Okay, I hope you see that. Because now it's about correct, and if they're different, source E does not prove that what the author says is correct. But if the content is similar, then for the correct part, then source E does prove that what the author says in source F is correct. Because the 2 of them are saying the same thing, they are similar. So therefore, one source, which is source E, proves that source F is correct. They're saying the same thing. Okay, I hope that you see the subtle difference between this question and the other question when the word wrong is used. Okay, basically you need to flip it around, like if you know what I'm saying, all right? You need to flip it around in some sense. Now, if the source E's content cross-reference to another reliable source or own knowledge and agrees, that means source E is reliable, right? And if source E is reliable, then it does prove that what the author says in source F is correct. Remember, so if the two of them agree, they are correct. And if source E is reliable, then lagi even more correct, right? They're definitely correct, okay? Now, if source E is reliable based on provenance and purpose, then of course source E is correct. That means source E does prove that source F is correct. So I hope I made this point clear to everyone. Okay, when it's correct, this is the whole idea. When source E is correct, if source E is reliable, then obviously does prove that source F is correct. Now, what happens if source F has a questionable purpose? Now, if source F has a questionable purpose, that means that source F is not reliable, right? Now, if source F is not reliable, then source E does not prove that what is said in source F is correct. Because, in other words, source F is wrong, and so source E does not prove that what is said in source E is correct. Okay? Now, the final question really is this question, and it says here, how far does source F disprove the claims made in source E? Explain your answer. Actually, what this question is saying, when you see the word disprove, it means proof that something is false. In other words, proof that something is wrong. So it actually goes back to the questions that we are very familiar with. Okay, the idea of does source E prove that source E is wrong? So that's it. Actually, you see the word disprove, you might get shocked, but actually this is what it means. Prove that something is false. Therefore, it's quite similar to the earlier ones that we did, the first two that we did. So, for example, if source F content agrees with source E, then source F does not disprove the claims made in source E. If source F's content disagrees with source E, then source F does disprove the claims made in source E. So when there's disagreement, then the source F does disprove. When there's agreement between the sources, then source F does not disprove the claims. And if we were to cross-reference source F, and we cross-reference it to a reliable source or own knowledge that's reliable, and it agrees, then obviously source F does disprove the claims made in source E. Now, if source F has a questionable purpose, then source F is unreliable, and therefore source F does not disprove the claims made in source E. All right? Now, if source F's provenance and purpose is very reliable, that means source F is of course reliable and correct, and therefore source F does disprove the claims made in source E. And finally, if source F has a questionable purpose or provenance, means something's wrong and therefore becomes unreliable, source E, then source F does disprove the claims made in source E. In other words, source S does prove that source E is wrong, right? Because source E is unreliable. Okay? Now, I want to spend some time also talk about this idea of enhanced reliability based on provenance, because we are in this issue about reliability. And let's look at the source again. Now I'm going to change the source a bit and says this. Source C said by Liverpool fan, Man U is a great club. The stadium is at Old Trafford. So now the question is this. Oh, of course, and then Source D says that Man U is a great club, and the stadium is at Old Trafford. Now, does Source C have a questionable purpose, provenance, and is Source C reliable? So remember, Source C is the Liverpool fan. Source C says Man U is a great club. What do you think? Do you think that it has a questionable purpose? Is it reliable? Well, the answer is this. Because Source C was said by a Liverpool fan, and you know for provenance, Liverpool fan is a rival of Man U. They don't like one another. And if he says that Man U is a great club, then what happens is this. Source C has what we call enhanced reliability. Because it's said by a Liverpool fan, but yet he praises Man U. And therefore, Source C is very, very reliable. What O-level says, an enhanced reliability. Okay, so I want you to bear this in mind, because sometimes when you're looking at some sources do lend itself to this idea of enhanced reliability. All right. Maybe let's look at a historical example. Source S said by a member of the SS, Hitler's bodyguard, and they say Hitler is a bad leader. Now remember, the SS, Hitler's bodyguard, and the SS supposedly very loyal to Hitler, and this comment is made, Hitler is a bad leader. Now, question, is Source X reliable? All right, is Source X reliable? And the answer is very reliable, what we call enhanced reliability. Why? Because Source S said by a member of the SS, provenance, the SS were Nazis, supposed to be extremely loyal to Hitler, so they always say good things, but this time now they say bad things. Therefore, Source SX has this thing as enhanced reliability, and saying that said by the SS that Hitler is a bad leader, and therefore Source X is very reliable. So, as mentioned before, some of the sources do lend itself to this idea of enhanced reliability. So do take note. Okay? So, hope you had had some time to digest this new skill called hybrid comparison proof/reliability. And in conclusion, I thought we end off with a nice summary, said by Mr. Khan. Man U is a great club. Does this source by Mr. Khan prove that Man U is a great club? Is Mr. Khan reliable? I leave you all to think about it. Use your purpose, use your cross-referencing, and of course, we can have many, many arguments about this. All right. So thank you so much, everybody, and I hope that you all had time to digest this new skill. And if you are not sure of this new skill, again, you can always play the video again to look at some of the things that's been taught, so that you become familiar with some of the statements. And then when you do the real sources in the O-levels, you can use some of these statements in the answers. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a great day. Take care.